Let's start today's video with Laurel K. Hamilton's line, "Stupidity isn't punishable by death. If it was, there would be a hell of a population drop." But the real question is, why are people stupid? And more importantly, when does stupidity become dangerous? I've written on this topic many times, and every time I think I've finally said everything, something in me stays unsatisfied. Because stupidity isn't simple. It has layers, depths, levels. So today, I'm breaking down the 7 levels of stupidity, from harmless ignorance all the way to the kind of stupidity that destroys relationships, societies, and sometimes entire civilizations. And who knows, while watching this, a part of the mind might wonder, which level do I fall into? So let's get into it. True knowledge begins with understanding how much one does not know. Passive ignorance is the most innocent and almost harmless form of foolishness, as it is simply not knowing, the state every human begins life in. A child unaware of mathematics or an adult unfamiliar with another culture's customs is not malicious or stubborn, they simply lack information. As Boris Kruger notes, ignorance can be corrected through learning, and mistakes can be fixed through awareness. It is a gap that experience, education, or curiosity can easily fill, which is why this level is forgivable. Socrates built an entire philosophy around the humility of admitting one's limits, famously claiming that he knew only that he knew nothing, and this awareness, rather than arrogance, is what separates harmless ignorance from deeper and more dangerous forms of foolishness. Bertrand Russell echoed this idea in The History of Western Philosophy, writing that people are born ignorant, not stupid, though he later added that poor education can turn ignorance into something worse. Yet even this mildest form of foolishness carries a subtle risk, the danger of remaining ignorant, not because the person rejects truth, but because they never bother seeking it. A simple health myth left unexamined, or a financial misunderstanding never questioned, can grow into poor decisions that could have been avoided with a few minutes of honest inquiry. Even Martin Luther King Jr. distinguished between sincere ignorance and deliberate stupidity, placing honest unawareness at the lower and less dangerous end of the spectrum. For while it can still cause harm, it lacks the intent that makes higher levels so destructive. The greatest enemy of true knowledge is not simple ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. Confident misunderstanding is ignorance dressed in armor, appearing when someone not only holds a false belief, but defends it with absolute certainty. This is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less a person knows, the more certain they become of their own expertise. Imagine someone who has never studied economics warning others about market crashes, or a student insisting firmly on the wrong answer. They're mistaken, yet fully convinced they are right. David Dunning and Justin Kruger described this bias in 1999, though its roots go back to Darwin's observation that ignorance often produces confidence more than knowledge does. Modern thinkers echo this idea. When someone is deeply unaware, it is impossible for them to see it. Scientific studies confirm that people with the least ability consistently overestimate their skills. This level becomes dangerous because confidence amplifies mistakes. A confused person who knows they might be wrong can still be guided, but someone who trusts only themselves misleads everyone who listens. Confidence is often mistaken for competence, especially in politics, journalism, or social media, where a single boldly stated misunderstanding spreads faster than careful truth. At this stage, mental blindness emerges as foolishness survives among facts, wrapped in confidence and resistant to correction. Confident misunderstanding is the early stage of this blindness. The person is not merely uninformed, they believe they already know enough. Evidence becomes an inconvenience, and certainty blocks learning. Philosophers have long warned about this dangerous mix of arrogance and ignorance. Aristotle saw foolishness not as a lack of intelligence, but as a failure of character and judgment, the pride that refuses correction. A person in this state believes their view is complete, can even convince themselves using weak reasoning, and clings to it because admitting error feels like shame. This stage marks the threshold between harmless mistakes and active stubbornness, and the moment someone doubles down on a false belief, they become truly dangerous. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. Emotional reasoning marks the point where feelings become the filter for reality. At this stage, a person treats inner emotion as external proof. This idea comes directly from cognitive therapy. Aaron Beck identified it as a core distortion in the 1970s. The pattern is simple but tricky. I feel it, therefore it must be true. Guilt becomes evidence of wrongdoing. Fear becomes evidence of danger. The emotion replaces the fact. Psychologist Leon F. Seltzer describes emotional reasoning as concluding that one's emotional reaction defines reality. Evidence that contradicts the feeling gets dismissed automatically. As Seltzer notes, observed evidence is disregarded or dismissed in favor of the assumed truth of one's feelings. A single mistake triggers the feeling of stupidity, and suddenly the person believes they are stupid. A moment of anger toward a coworker convinces them the coworker must have malicious intentions. What separates this level from simple misunderstanding is that the emotional reasoner often knows the facts but refuses to accept them. They are aware that others see things differently, yet the emotion in them feels stronger than logic. Reality becomes distorted through an internal storm. This level is dangerous because emotions are powerful drivers of behavior. Emotion-based beliefs lead to emotional actions. In relationships, this can spiral quickly. I feel neglected, so I know I'm unloved. From there comes jealousy, accusations, or withdrawal, all based on a feeling rather than evidence. In politics, emotional interpretations, I feel threatened, so they must be a threat, fuel prejudice and extremist thinking. Emotional reasoning turns subjective reaction into absolute certainty. This stage is often reinforced by cognitive biases. Confirmation bias strengthens the loop. Only facts that support the emotion get noticed. A sad mind recalls only failures. A proud mind recalls only victories. Everything else disappears. Feeling becomes the filter, and the filter becomes the worldview. This level is far more hazardous than ordinary misunderstanding because it's not built on faulty logic, it's built on emotional impulse. Emotions can provoke extreme reactions, panic, rage, despair, impulsive decisions. When groups fall into emotional reasoning, the result is mass hysteria, outrage cycles, and moral panics. A feeling of threat transforms into collective fear long before anyone checks the facts. This level marks the turning point in the descent. Logic still exists, but it has been dethroned. From here onward, the ego begins to dominate perception, and the next stages grow darker and more destructive. The eye sees only what the mind is ready to accept. Unlike simple mistakes or emotional distortions, this level involves a conscious turning away from the truth. A person may sense reality or even be directly informed of it, yet chooses to ignore it because facing it would be painful, inconvenient, or threatening. The term willful blindness gained attention through Margaret Heffernan, whose book Willful Blindness: Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril argues that you cannot fix a problem that you refuse to acknowledge. This perfectly describes the trap. Problems grow not because they are invisible, but because people actively avoid confronting them. Willful blindness often arises from fear, comfort, or self-protection. A manager who notices a toxic employee might pretend nothing is wrong to avoid conflict or protect their own reputation, while a government official might dismiss warnings of collapse because acknowledging them would require unpopular action. Many people prefer the safety of illusion over the discomfort of truth, and as a result, small cracks turn into catastrophic failures while everyone maintains the fiction that everything is fine. Heffernan captures the danger, pointing out that the biggest threats we face are the ones we do not see, not because they are invisible, but because we choose to be blind to them. Corporate scandals often grow from this dynamic, with employees whispering about misconduct while leadership pretends not to hear. Classic psychological studies, such as the Milgram obedience experiment and the Stanford prison experiment, illustrate the same phenomenon. Participants recognize that something is wrong, yet comply anyway. As Boris Kruger observes, people can become instruments of harm not out of malice, but out of blind submission to authority. What makes this level particularly destructive is the shift from passive ignorance to deliberate denial. The walls erected here consist of intentional excuses, deflections, and self-serving narratives. It's not my responsibility. Someone else will fix it. If I don't look at it, maybe it will go away. These rationalizations act as a shield, protecting the person from discomfort while allowing danger to grow unchecked. This form of stupidity often extends beyond individuals, infecting entire systems. Choosing not to know can become the catalyst for tragedy. Escaping willful blindness usually requires an external shock, a whistleblower, a crisis, or a confrontation. Only when the protective wall cracks does the truth become visible. Heffernan's warning remains central. Nothing improves until it is acknowledged. Where everyone thinks the same way, no one really thinks deeply. At this stage, stupidity stops being just a personal flaw and becomes a force shared by the group. Herd stupidity happens when people give up thinking for themselves and simply follow the crowd, even when the crowd is clearly wrong. It is deliberate blindness multiplied, confident misunderstanding reinforced, and emotional reasoning echoed by hundreds of voices. Psychologist Solomon Esch showed this very clearly in his famous conformity experiments, where participants were asked to match a line to a reference line. When everyone else in the room purposely gave the wrong answer, about 75% of participants went along at least once, even though they could clearly see the correct choice. The pressure from the group overpowered their own perception. Many later admitted they knew the group was wrong, but were afraid to stand out, while others began doubting their own senses. This phenomenon was recognized long before modern psychology. In the 19th century, Charles Mackay described the mass irrationality of crowds in his book Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, writing that people think in herds, go mad in herds, and recover their senses slowly, one by one. His observation captures the essence of herd stupidity. Even intelligent people lose clarity when caught up in collective momentum. Herd stupidity is dangerous because of its scale. One person's mistake is small, but a crowd's mistake can be catastrophic. History is full of examples, from financial bubbles fueled by mass enthusiasm, to political movements powered by slogans rather than substance, to riots amplified by collective adrenaline, or panic buying triggered by a rumor of shortage. When masses move together, rational thinking becomes optional and consequences multiply. This stage becomes even more dangerous when combined with earlier forms of stupidity, as emotional reasoning spreads rapidly in crowds, turning one person's fear into collective hysteria. The result is mass decision-making warped by shared delusion, which can lead to war, persecution, economic collapse, or widespread social dysfunction. Even brilliant individuals are vulnerable. As Mackay suggested, herd madness engulfs almost everyone until a few dissenters break the spell. Independent thought requires courage, while conformity requires only silence, and groupthink thrives when silence becomes the normal behavior. We arrive at intellectual arrogance when stupidity stops being accidental and becomes a mindset. This is not just about being wrong, it is being proud of being wrong. It is the belief that all answers are already known, that no further learning is necessary, and that every opposing view is beneath consideration. At this stage, stupidity is not passive anymore. It actively shuts down inquiry. This kind of arrogance often presents itself as confidence or wisdom. Erasmus described it perfectly when he mocked the learned man who hides his ignorance behind robes of authority. In The Praise of Folly, he showed how a scholar can appear brilliant while being completely clueless simply by hiding behind academic pretension. What made it dangerous, he said, was not the wrongness itself, but the self-satisfaction and refusal to be corrected. Aristotle also warned about this mindset, noting that even intelligent people can fall into poor reasoning when pride takes over. In real life, intellectual arrogance looks like pure refusal. I don't care about that source. Everyone who disagrees is ignorant. It is the belief that knowledge has an endpoint, their endpoint. Often it grows from earlier levels. Someone who was willfully blind convinces themselves that their blindness was wisdom all along, or someone guided by emotions weaponizes their certainty, thinking, "How dare anyone question me? Doesn't the strength of my conviction prove I'm right?" The damage this causes is enormous. Earlier levels still allow correction, but arrogance builds a fortress around beliefs brick by brick. Critics are dismissed, evidence is twisted, and warnings are ignored. This is why many thinkers have argued that intellectual arrogance lies at the root of countless disasters. Martin Luther King Jr.'s warning that nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity captures this perfectly. The danger is not just in not knowing. The danger is in choosing not to know and being proud of it. This is where ignorance and arrogance mix with something far more dangerous, ill will. It shows up when people or systems cause harm not just by accident, but through a toxic combination of false certainty, blindness to reality, and a willingness to hurt others. At this stage, harm is done with full conviction. Cruelty is justified by a false cause. Reckless decisions are defended by twisted logic. The person is not merely mistaken, they truly believe that their harmful actions are righteous, necessary, or deserved. Bonhoeffer long ago drew a line between malice and stupidity. The malicious person knows they are doing evil. The stupid person cannot even recognize the suffering they cause. But here, the line blurs. Malicious stupidity is a hybrid. It is when someone acts from ignorance, yet uses it confidently and aggressively. They attack others believing their false worldview makes them heroic. Bonhoeffer warned that a stupid person becomes dangerous when they go on the attack. This is exactly what happens at this final level. Think of an extremist committing violence because of a conspiracy they genuinely believe is sacred truth. Think of a leader spreading destructive propaganda, truly thinking it serves a greater good. Martin Luther King Jr. called this conscientious stupidity. the kind that hides behind duty, truth, or moral purpose. At this level, mistakes turn into moral crimes. A lie becomes a mission, and the person causing harm genuinely believes they are doing something noble. Pure malice at least knows it is evil. Malicious stupidity believes it is good, which makes it far more unpredictable and far more destructive. And when this level of stupidity captures institutions, governments, armies, corporations, or religious movements, the consequences can shake entire civilizations. Wars, genocides, oppression, societal collapses. This final stage is not just dangerous, it is capable of tearing societies apart. And that brings us to the ultimate truth of this entire journey. Nothing in the whole world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance combined with conscientious stupidity.